everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we're happy to be speaking with Dr. Richard Byron-Cox. Dr. Byron-Cox holds a PhD in public international law. He's a trained and experienced diplomat, international relations specialist, and linguist. As a writer and essayist, he tackles subjects ranging from international law to sustainable development and global environmental politics. Dr. Byron-Cox is the author of the critically acclaimed historical novel, Were Mama's Tears in Vain? Dr. Byron-Cox started his career in the Ministry of Legal Affairs of SVG as Chief Advisor on International Law. He later joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Chief Advisor to both the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister on matters of foreign policy and international law. He has been working for the United Nations organization for more than 2 decades, dealing with issues of sustainable development, a field in which he recognized as a top international expert. Dr. Byron-Cox is presently the head of the Capacity Development and Innovation Office at the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. There, he is responsible for alia, for spearheading the Capacity Development Program, coordinating the internship mentorship program, and leading the Secretariat's program on innovations. In his present work, Dr. Byron-Cox has realized many firsts, including masterminding the conceptualization, design, development, and implementation of UNCCD Capacity Building Marketplace, its exclusive e-learning platform, as well as the world's first ever project aimed at achieving land degradation neutrality in 14 countries around the world. Richard, welcome.
Good day, and good day to your audience around the world. It's a great honor and a great pleasure for me to be here. Just to say a little bit about who I am, I'm a trained lawyer, trained diplomat, I'm trained in international relations, and a trained linguist as well. I have been working with the United Nations in the area of sustainable development for 20 years and more. I wouldn't tell you how long, then you'd figure out how old I am. And I have been a university teacher in the sense that I teach universities around the world as a visiting professor, as a visiting lecturer at many schools around the world on issues of sustainable development, international law, public international law, international environmental law, international politics, and international relations, and of course, more specifically about the convention where I work. As you would know, the UNCCD, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, is one of the 3 Rio Conventions. They're called Rio Conventions because in 1992, there was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio, Brazil. And that is when the world first, in a very serious way, decided that universally we needed to tackle the issue of environment and development. And so the whole concept of what is called sustainable development actually came into being in a real way. This was actually started when the Commission on Sustainable Development was established in 1987 by then Javier Perez de Cuellar, who was then Secretary General of the United Nations. And this was headed by Madame Brundtland from Norway. She was the Prime Minister, and she was the head of this commission. So it's sometimes called by her name. And they came up with the concept of sustainable development. Now, this is built on 3 major conventions. Climate change, or what is called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The latest addition to that, if you want to call it that, is the Paris Treaty, as you would know. There was, right? And then there is what is called the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. And this is a convention which deals with the protection of biodiversity in the world. And of course, there is my convention, which is the Convention on Land. Now, desertification, I think I need to explain a little bit about that, because people don't really know what that actually means. People believe that desertification means fighting desert. That's a terrible mistake. the oldest desert in this world, as geology teaches us, is the Namib Desert in Namibia. That country is called Namibia because of the desert itself, right? The Namib Desert. And it is 55 million years old. It is it is much, much older than any human being on this planet ever was, you know. The human species, we understand it because according to biology, basically, biological species exist for about 200,000 years, you know. So we have been here for about 200,000 years as the human beings that we are today. So the point I'm trying to make is that a desert, as you and I understand it, is a naturally occurring ecosystem. It is something which naturally exists, like in the mid-desert or the Sahara Desert or whatever other desert you want. So we're not here to fight that. No, that's a mistake. What we're talking about here is when good land becomes so bad that it stops producing. And so it takes on sort of desert-like features, okay? It becomes dry, it doesn't produce anymore, and so on. And that is what is called desertification, meaning when good land becomes so bad that it began to look like desert.
Right. So our agricultural sites can turn into that, the forests can turn into that. It can be any good land.
And any good land, because you see, there is when we talk about land in this sense, what we're talking about is what is called bioproductive land which can produce food and water and so on and sustain life. That's what we're talking about. So this is what this convention is about. Now, there are three important things I have to tell you, which I think we need to understand very, very clearly. The first is that today, the issue of climate change is the number one issue, you know, and so you hear a lot about it, and that is fine, that is correct, we need to address that. But if you understand the climate issue and the climate science, the scientists tell you that what you need is something called carbon sequestration, so that the carbon, which is in the air, can go into places, you know, and so on. And we know that about 30% of all carbon is sequestered in the sea, in the oceans. We also know that good soils are very good sequesters of carbon, but everybody agrees that green trees are necessary for the sequestration of carbon. Now listen this is the mathematics. This is the important moment. I would like anybody to tell me, if you agree that green trees are necessary for carbon sequestration, good, so that means you have to plant the trees, right? Where are you going to plant them? In the sea? In the sky? Where? In space? Where? The only place you can plant them, as far as I know, is good lands. The point is this: there is no way that you can fix climate change unless you fix land. It's an elementary truth. We need to understand that very, very clearly. And any science which teaches otherwise is mistaken. And you can say Richard Byron-Cox said that. I don't say that as a scientist, I say that as a logical and reasonable man. It's as simple as that.
And it's not discussed enough. You're so right.
Right? So the point is that the nexus between all of this is land. But we have just dealt with climate, so let's deal with biodiversity. I think you would agree with me that all biodiversity needs a place called a habitat, a place where it lives. And as we know, all biodiversity either live in the land, on the land, or in the sea. Isn't that correct? Now, if your habitat is destroyed, it means where you get your food, your water, and so on is destroyed. What will happen to you? You will die. Again, you cannot fix biodiversity if you don't fix land. Also, you say, yes, what about those in the sea? Aha, we know that all the chemicals and so on that we're using on the land, it washes into the sea and poisons the sea. As a matter of fact, I am from the Caribbean, and there's something called coral, which is under the sea, and where the fish live and so on and so on. Because of all of these chemicals and so on, the corals are now being bleached. And so therefore the fish can't live anymore. When I was a little boy, I wouldn't tell you how old I am because that would frighten you. But when I was a small child, I remember I was born and grew up in the Caribbean, right? I'm actually from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is a small archipelago in the southern part of the Caribbean. And as a child, I remember you can just stand up on a rock and throw a line out and catch fish. You know, we did that. You didn't need a boat to do this. And now the fishermen have to go further and further and further out to fish. As a matter of fact, all the science prove that the sea now is 30% more acid than it was before the Industrial Revolution. Now, these are issues which are dealing with human life. So I'm saying to you that it is impossible for us to fix the biodiversity question, and it is impossible for us to fix the climate question if we do not understand that the land question is intricately tied to this. We must understand something, that this planet is one system. And you might not see it yet, but when you affect this side, sooner or later the whole system becomes affected. And that's a reality. I can prove that quite easily. Quite easily. Let's take the land issue again. Let's take some countries. Right? You have where because of land and because land get bad, people have to run away from home because a lot of people make the mistake of believing that mass migration is something people choose. It's not true. Mass migration happens because people are looking for something called opportunity. Mm-hmm. And when it's not at home, they go somewhere else. That's elementary truth. It's elementary fact. Now, so you have a situation where some people are running from certain countries and then end up in other countries. And you have people drowning in the sea, hundreds of people dying and so on. And you say, yeah, because the land problem is their problem. But it becomes yours because why? They have to run there and they're coming to you.
Yeah.
You understand? The point is this is one system. And so if you're going to tackle it, you have to tackle it systemically and systematically. If you don't do that, if you sectionalize this problem, if you attack this problem from a parochial standpoint, from a narrow standpoint, you will never fix it.
Yeah.
But then let's go on, because I want to bring this home in real terms so that we understand that this is not an atmospheric discussion, but this is a real discussion about your life. If you check the science, it will tell you this. Averagely, on the average, the normal human being would live 60 days without food, 6 days without water, and 6 minutes without oxygen. I'll repeat that because we need to understand what we're talking about here. That the normal human being, normally, he or she would live 60 days without food, 6 days without water, and 6 minutes without oxygen. Some of us are stronger, and we might live 2 or 3 days longer. Some of us have a cancer or whatever, and our body is weak, and we would not last that long. So we're talking on the average. Now, please point out to me, please explain to me, which of those you can have without land? Yes, where do you get your food from? It comes from the moon? Ha, think again. What about your oxygen? We know that the green plants turn carbon dioxide into oxygen. We know this. We were taught this in primary school. And all the water in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it comes from the rain, but then it's stored in what is called watersheds. So please tell me, which of these you can have without land? We must not confuse these issues. And the young people of this world must understand what this discussion is about. Now, you say, yes, I'm a millionaire, I'm a billionaire, I have money, I don't need it. Good, so you're going to live on the moon. You can buy your own spacecraft and go and live on the moon. Yes, let's agree that you can live there. But let me ask you the question, where are you going to get the oxygen from on the moon? And where are you going to get the food from on the moon? And where are you going to get the water from the moon? It has to come from this planet. As Carl Sagan tells us, as far as we know physics and we know the universe, this is the only planet that can sustain human life. We're not saying that there are not others, but as far as we know, that's what the discussion is. So even if you're a billionaire and you want to go and live on the moon, please do. But don't come back down here for any water or food or oxygen. Please live up there forever. So you see, yes, we have to bring these discussions real, and we have to let these things be real. Listen to me. I am convinced that until we teach our young people what is called intrinsic value, real value, then we have a problem in this world. And until we are able to have that kind of discussion with the intelligent young people who are at universities now and who are being indoctrinated rather than educated, we have a serious problem. Serious problem. You know, whether you like this or not, the American dollar or the European Union euro or the Chinese yen or the Japanese, whatever they have, none of that has intrinsic value. No. It has a nominal value that we give it. Now, I live in Germany. I'm talking to you from Germany. If you know anything about history, you would know that before 1945, the German mark could buy you quite a lot. 2 bread, a pound of sugar, 4 beers, I don't know what. By the time the war was finished, to buy 1 bread, you had to push a wheelbarrow of money. It was the same money. It hadn't changed at all. The same mark, because it has no intrinsic value. It only has the value you gave it. Now, let's be clear here that you have money, you can buy some water. So you go down to the store and you take your money, you buy a bottle of water. Now, I would give you all of my money and all of the money my parents and everybody else in my family has ever made. It's not a lot, but I'll give it all to you on one condition, that you would stop your nose and close your mouth and count it dollar for dollar, and let's see how long you're going to last. Because without oxygen, you're going to die. But outside of that, I'd give you that money. And you would not buy anything with it. You would ask, if it's so great, if it's so important, if it's so valuable, you would ask it to create the food for you. So you put it down, I give you the money. You put it down on your table and say, please, money, create food. And let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. These are the discussions that we need. These atmospheric discussions that have nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with people's life. Yes, I'm intellectual. Yes, I have been trained at a university and so on and so on. Yes, but I make a fundamental difference between me being educated and me being indoctrinated. When I left university, I thought, ooh, I'm a bright boy. Because I got a PhD when I was 29 years old. So I was, ooh, bright boy, yeah. In less than 3 months, I realized now, it's quite very, very well certified. I had degrees that show that I had gone to university. So I had certification. Yes. But that was the best that I had. Over time, I would have some qualification. Certification and qualification not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
They're related sometimes. But I did know that it would take me a very long time if I ever become educated. I am still on that mission. I am certified, very well certified. Qualified, not too sure. Get in there a little bit, you know what I mean? But educated, no. I ain't educated at all. Understand? And this is what I think that we need to understand. We need to educate ourselves about this world and about what is happening to us. I suppose you, like many people, would have read some philosophy and would have heard of the great Socrates. And most people tend to believe that Socrates' greatest statement is that the only thing I know is that I know nothing. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's one of his better statements, but I don't believe that. For me, his best is this: you only die when you stop learning. So the mission is always to learn somehow. The mission is always to know somehow. You only die when you stop learning. And we need to learn. We need to understand these things. So back to the whole issue of I'm talking to you today, and I do what I do because it's not a job, it's not a profession, it's a conviction and evocation. It's different things. And until life in itself is understood in that sense, in terms of our pursuit for a better planet, it must become a conviction and evocation. Until we do that, we're still in serious trouble. So as regards the questions of sustainable development and as regards where I work, I must say that I'm happy that I am privileged to be able to have a chance to contribute to that. And I am privileged that you have invited me to talk on your podcast because it gives me a chance to sort of try and reach other people. I'm not professing to be right, but I'm professing that I mean well.
Well, we feel privileged that you're here today. And I want to highlight a few things that you mentioned and that are so, so important when we're talking about really any issue in the world. I think number one, the continuing education of the educator. I think that awareness alone is so important for educators to have, to sort of like not close themselves and remain aware of what is happening in the world, and even new like propositions or offerings from young minds on what we may need to change or how can we change, or here are some solutions. Like being open and trying to push yourself to learn. I think that is something that any university or educational institution need, really. And I think that I really want to underline and highlight. The other part is also what you've talked about and sort of touches upon the accessibility around information. So when you said, these are not atmospheric conversations, it is so true. When we're talking about high level terms or just like vocabulary, it is easier to sort of compartmentalize problems or say it's the problem of other. But when you're talking about real facts or day-to-day things that anybody can really understand, that ties to all these terms, right? Climate change, biodiversity, desertification, then it makes it more relatable, and that creates access to information. And you don't distance yourself from the problem, you actually feel more part of it. And then you may want to do something more about it later on too, which is one of the main reasons why we're doing these podcasts too, in order to raise awareness around issues, but also talk to experts who can provide information in a more accessible way without just throwing out big terms, but also like making us really understand how does this connect to us and to our future. So these two things, I'm so glad you started off with. They're both so important. And I do want to ask maybe a little bit further in depth into, we talked about systemic and systematical, right? So decertification exists, and exists because of many, many different reasons and systemic issues. So can we highlight some of these and what are the sort of contributing factors to this existing problem?
Okay, firstly, it is important that we make a very fundamental distinction between the disease and the symptom. Okay, because a lot of people confuse the disease with the symptom, and that we must not do. Now, desertification in and of itself is not a disease, it is a symptom. And this is hard for a lot of people to accept. And there are many people who are going to argue with this when you do show this podcast. But the point is this: climate change, biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity, and desertification are all serious symptoms of one disease, our mistreatment of this planet. That's the disease. The disease is our behavior. And you can do whatever you want until you change that behavior. Those problems are going to exist. Now let's go back to, let's deal with this in a very, because as I said, I don't want to speak atmospherically. I want to speak very, very concretely. Now, let's take the Caribbean. In 2017, that was the most deadly season of hurricanes in the history of the Caribbean. About 9 countries were seriously damaged. Places like Dominica were terribly destroyed, and so on and so forth. Now, yes, we can go to the World Bank and say, oh, Lord, help us. I mean, we're mashed up and we're destroyed. And say, okay, yeah, we give you some billions, you build back the hospitals and you build back the schools and so on and so on. But guess what? We continue with this pouring of carbon gases into the sky. So the next year we go back and they have to give us 10 billion. And next year we go back and 20 billion. Listen, at the end of this day, every 24 hours, we put 90 million tons of earth-warming substance into the sky every single day. Now, you might say, oh, the storms are the problems and we have to fix the Caribbean. No, what we have to fix is our behavior to this planet. And when we fix that, right, what you would have is first and foremost, half of this carbon would not be going into the sky anymore. And therefore not changing weather patterns and not leading to greater droughts. Therefore not leading to what? Greater desertification. Okay? Same thing. If we could curtail some of our greed, and so therefore don't chop down the entire forest because we have to plant teak or sugar cane or whatever to make more money. You know what I mean? And as I've explained, money is a piece of paper. Whether you believe that or not, it is true. That's what it is, generally speaking. Money has to be used today, right? And do you believe that if you're going to chop down the forest, okay, how can you then protect whatever lives in that forest? And listen to me very carefully what I'll say now. People would say to you, yeah, so we can chop down the forest and we can plant sugar cane there and so on. And when you fly over the place, it's still green, but now it's a green desert. Now, what is a green desert? Yes, everything is green, the sugar cane is growing and so on and so on. But the entire ecosystem, which was there before, that maintained the forest, has completely been destroyed to support just this one crop. Outside of that, you are now putting fertilizers and God knows what else. Tractors are running through there. The entire ecosystem has changed. So what you have is green, yes, lots of sugarcane, but it's a green desert because everything else has been killed to maintain that sugar plantation. We have to understand this. So when we talk, let's get concretely, when we talk about what causes these things, climate change, biodiversity, and so on and so forth, let us understand that first and foremost, biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, desertification, are symptoms of a disease which is improper human behavior. Now, the concept of justice, as we understand, is a social thing. It's my justice and your justice. You understand? Justice for me and you, my right and your right, that is justice. So this is big preaching about human rights and all of that. All of that is good. But let me ask you a question. Does your justice mean anything if you are dead? It means nothing. You understand? Justice for you as a human being, for me as a human being, must be an atmosphere in which I am alive, first and foremost. Now, you remember a few minutes ago, we said without air, food, and water, what will happen to you? You will die. Therefore, the fundamental basis of your justice lies somewhere else, not in a court system, but in somewhere else. Something that guarantees your life. Because that is the first basis. You first have to be a human being before you can claim any justice. So let's get a little bit more concrete and deal with this matter. If this is true, then you obviously have to protect those things which guarantee your material life. And if this is true, then you have to be just to those things. And so therefore, justice cannot just be an anthropogenic kind of understanding that deals only with human beings. For you to have justice, you have to have universal justice, which includes what? ecological justice. And that's the only way we can protect the land. That's the only way we can protect biodiversity, because we seek to be just to them. You understand? The father of the theory of biological evolution, right? The man who wrote what is called The Origins of Species, Charles Darwin. In the latter years of his life, he said, man's most noble trait is his kindness, gentleness, or his compassion for the lesser beings. You know, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words. Mm-hmm. You know, but he said that. That's Charles Darwin. And what we are doing in our behavior is anything but that. Check and see how many species are on the endangered list. And listen to me carefully. By the time we finish with this podcast, at least 3 species would have disappeared from this planet, never to return again. Every hour, we are destroying at least 3 species. This is not Byron-Cox speaking. The scientist has proven that. The problem, therefore, please, let us not confuse the symptom with the disease. The disease is human behavior, and we have got to correct that. Now, in real terms, for young people, for me, for you, well, I'm not that young, but you know, how do we deal with that? Well, the father of Indian independence is a man named Mahatma Gandhi. His actual name is not Mahatma, his name is Mohandas Gandhi. Mm. They changed his name and called him Mahatma, which means the great soul. Mm. That's what it actually means. But that's not his name. His birth name is Mohandas Gandhi. And the Indians were right in doing that because that man had a depth of understanding. There are many things that he said which are very profound. Gandhi was the kind of man who would make one sentence, and if you understood him, you could write a book from it. He once said this: you have to be the change you want to see in this world. So in dealing with these problems, the source of these problems, in truth and in fact, is human behavior. That's the real source. That behavior comes in many different ways, in our economic behavior, okay, in our social behavior one with another, and so on. But it is human behavior. And that is what we have to do. Now, you know, as a teacher, quite often there's the universities in what are called developing countries who would invite me to talk. And they say, oh, you know, Dr. Byron-Cox, we can't pay you. And I started to laugh. I said, if you had suggested to pay me, I would not come. I'm from the Caribbean. The University of Trinidad and Tobago invited me to do distinguished lecture. And they were like, oh, Dr. Byron-Cox, how much you charge? And I'm like, are you out of your mind? I'm from the Caribbean. I'm here to do this for the people of the world. That's it. But why am I telling you that story? I'm telling you that to say this. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. You can't just talk, you know. You can't just talk. Action is the true agent of change. Action is the true agent of change. Until you get there, something is terribly wrong. You got to fix that, you know. And so the true source of these problems is human behavior. A couple of scientists have argued that if all the human beings in this world died out, the only thing that would change would be that nature would reclaim everything that we have taken from it. So trees would start to grow up in my house and destroy my house and so on. Can you imagine if all the bees and the other pollinators were destroyed, we'd starve to death? Do you know that about 30% of all of our food is provided by those pollinators, and we have never paid them $1 to this day. These are the realities. And so when we talk to our children, we're supposed to let them understand the value of a butterfly to the very food that they eat. We can go on and discuss and pretend to be the greatest intellectual in the world until you understand that intelligence is a practice. Until you understand that intelligence is a practice, then what is the use of your intelligence? If you can work out the greatest physics problem in this world on a blackboard, x, y over z multiplied by this, and that cannot be applied to your life every day, then what is the purpose of your intelligence? Please explain this to me. For me, intelligence is a practice. That's what intelligence is. First and foremost, a practice. So, if we are to discuss these things intelligently, let us not confuse the disease with the symptom. The disease, in this regard, is human behavior. There's no if and buts about that.
I love when we said, like, okay, let's dive deeper into the issues. And we could have talked about many things, right? We could have talked about problems in different industries that cause desertification and all of that. But even like zooming in way in to end at the result, at the real reason of everything, that is human behavior, unfortunately driven by profit and therefore money, and which has nominal value and not real value that actually would sustain your life.
Driven by many things, driven by ethnicity, driven by greed, driven by social relations, driven by xenophobia, driven by all sorts, but it's all what? Human behavior at the end of the day. So one can use fancy terms and confuse oneself.
Yeah.
You understand? It's one thing for you to confuse me. It's another thing for me to want to confuse myself. The great civil rights leader of America in the 60s, 50s, and 60s was Dr. Martin Luther King. He once said this: "There's nothing in all the world more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." There's nothing in all the world more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. I try very much to be intelligent. And as I said, intelligence is a practice.
So I'll ask the big question. So human behavior, and we can be motivated by many, many different things, right? And we can be distracted by many different things as well. How do we, well, what are the things that we should be doing so that we prioritize? And obviously it starts with awareness, right? Awareness about issue and where we're going as the planet, not like our land, not, you know, that society, that culture, that country, but as the planet. How do we, on our day-to-day, how can we practice to prioritize the planet so that we prioritize actually our own well-being? How do we remind this to ourselves in an everyday?
Well, you began correctly. I think the first thing, as you would have noticed, I'm big on what is called education, not indoctrination, not certification. I think we got to be aware, and that is what I mean by education, aware of our place within this and the importance of everything else around us. I think we have to be aware. Now, you know, Black people in the Americas, and I say that because I'm from the Americas and I'm a Black man, for 400 years were slaves, and we couldn't read or write, but we are alive. Do you know why? Because the things which are necessary to keep us alive were always there, which is food, water, and air. Now listen to me carefully, very carefully. It therefore means that you didn't have to teach us any mathematics or chemistry or physics for us to be alive. So you must ask the question now, isn't it time that the issue of the life of this planet securing the life of this planet become as important as the two basic subjects which is taught in every country in this world. Wherever you are, there are two basic subjects which are taught: the language of the country and mathematics. In every nation that has a school system. So if you're in Spain, you go to school, and if you don't learn anything else, you learn Spanish and mathematics. In England, the same thing, if you don't learn anything else. But I just proved to you that slaves knew neither mathematics nor language, but we live. If we're facing an existential crisis today, what do we need to do then? So to answer your question in a very, very concrete way, the first thing we need to now do is that every school on this planet has to have three foundational subjects: the language, mathematics, and the survival of this planet. Call it sustainable development. Call it whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But you cannot argue with the fact that Black people didn't know how to read and write, but we're still here. Because that is not what is fundamental to your life. What is fundamental to your life, first and foremost, are the things which sustain that life. And so therefore, that's the first step we have to do. We must now agree at the global level that every nation will teach this subject of sustainable development. The moment you begin there, we would radically change this world, because we are radically changing the behavior of people. That's the first thing. I know you've never heard that before. It sounds like a mad theory, but I'm sure that you will go home and think about it. You say, yeah, quite strange. It's true. It's absolutely true. Your children, until they learn to speak and learn to count, lived. And the only reason why they live is because the things which sustain them were there: food, milk, whatever. Don't fool yourself about these things. So that's the first thing. It's the first concrete thing we must do here and now in fixing this first. The second thing we have to do is to understand that justice is not a human thing. It's a broader concept. You understand? As I was trying to explain earlier. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, we have got to be just not only onto ourselves, but everything else around us. And so therefore, we have to treat biodiversity, water, air in a just manner. And the point therefore means is that justice must become a universal concept that is all-embracing. Now you might say, I don't care about water. Yes, you don't care about it until the day you don't have anything to drink. And I don't care about this thing about protecting land. Yes, you don't care until the day you don't have any food to eat. Yeah. And the moment you understand, oh yes, my bread actually comes from the land. So I have to be careful with this now. My air that I breathe actually comes from there. Oh, I have to be careful with this now. And the water that I drink, yeah. Right? So that's the second thing. You understand? We're only in one podcast, so I have to answer these questions in a way where I cover the whole picture, but you can concretely apply what I'm saying. So that's the second thing, that there has to be now a movement at the international level of something called universal justice, which include ecological justice. The third thing we need to do in relation to all of this is to commit ourselves to these things. It's one thing to say about them, you know, you have the Paris Agreement, people talk foolishness and people don't agree, and we must commit. Without that commitment, then all of this is nice talk, beautiful talk. There's no commitment to it. It's like I told you, I go to third world countries to teach, and I'm committed to it. So I pay my own fare. I pay my own hotel bill. I pay my own meals because I'm committed to it. And out of that lead to the last broad part. It all stems down to action. because action is universal change maker. Those are the broad things. We can look into specific details because each situation is a particular situation. Okay? Each context is a particular context. But I believe that this is a podcast that we're speaking globally. And so we have to have those blanket or chapeau things that can apply across the globe. And those are what they are.
And I think all these must-haves as the planet does tie into very well on advice to younger generations who do want to make change, make progress, and solve issues, really, is to really, number one, as you said, educate yourself and be aware. And number two, take action, right? It doesn't help to just be aware, and it doesn't help to just, read about things and discuss with others and maybe help others be aware, but you're not taking any action yourself. And, we often meet many people who want to make change and want to make progress or impact, but really don't know where to start. But you can start with yourself. Just take individual action.
Well, as a teacher, I always believe that what my mother taught me when I was a small boy. My mother was a woman who only had a bachelor's degree and who will never ever achieve the academic things I did because she's dead, right? Because she's not bright. But why did I say that? I said because my mother is the most intelligent human being I have ever met in all of my life. And in teaching us things, my mother always used examples to demonstrate her point. Now, we get to what I want to tell you. A lot of young people make one mistake, a very serious mistake, which I hope those who would listen to this will not make. They believe that you have to be in some sort of power to act. You have to have some importance. You have to be president such and such or intellectual such and such. And if you're not that, then you can't change anything. And that's a terrible mistake to make. Let us use a couple of examples. Well, let's use one because we have limited time. Everybody know a man I just mentioned. His name is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he was the leader of this and so on and so on. He is, in my mind, from all the people I know of history, he's the second greatest human being I know. But Dr. King actually started that movement in a serious way because of a very simple person who was not a doctor, who was not an intellectual, who was not a president. She was actually a seamstress. Her name is Rosa Parks. And she just simply refused to get up. But she was a seamstress. She was nothing else. She was a seamstress. And out of that, today, some changes have been made. But Martin Luther King would always be recorded as long as human history exists. And it's the only man in the whole of the United States that there's a national holiday to. Not even George Washington has that. It all started from a woman who was a seamstress, guess what, in a public bus. My point to young people is this: you can act in whatever space you are. You don't have to become, President X, Y, or Z, or hold power someplace. You don't have to do that. You have your space and you act within that space. And one thing that life has taught me, the more you act in that space and the more you are effective and the more you're serious, somehow the other, that space just grows without you wanting it to grow sometimes. There's a man, his name is Chico Alvarez Mendez. He's from Brazil. He's dead. And Chico was a rubber tapper. That's how he made his living. And the big companies came and were chopping down the trees and so on. And he decided that, no, I have to save my job. So Chico began by trying to save his job. And he couldn't read. couldn't read or write. Chico would learn to read and write when he's like 18, 19 years old. But the moment Chico started that, the space opened and he began not to save his job, but save the job of everybody else who was doing that. And then the space opened and he began to save the community. Before his death, he was murdered. He said, when I began, I thought I was saving my job. And then I realized, no, I was saving the jobs of other people as well. And then I realized, no, I was saving the community. Then I realized, no, I was saving Brazil. And then I realized, no, I was trying to save the world. And a man who couldn't read, anybody who knows anything about the struggle of indigenous people would know Chico Mendes. He would always be recorded in history because he did not accept what a lot of young people seem to accept. I have to be president to be able to act. No, you have your space. That's a fundamental lesson you must learn. And from within that little space, you act and you push and so on, and it begins to open. You know, I'm from a very small place. And most of the time I appear at universities and so on, you know, and say, oh, this is Dr. Byron-Cox, he's from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And say, where is that? And you could see them whispering and so on. And then at the end of it, they would come to me and say, you must be the son of the president or something. I say, well, my country doesn't have a president in the first place. You know, and then like, how does someone come from you don't even have a university in that place. How does someone do this? How does someone end up coming from a place like that? And how do you do this? And I say, well, because of my money. Oh, so your mother was a doctor or something? Well, she was an ordinary woman. Nothing special about my mother. But she taught me a very basic thing. She took me outside one night and she said, look up there. What do you see? I was a child who thought I was much brighter than I really was. So I would feel embarrassed when people ask me self-evident questions, you know, like, but who do you think you're talking to? That's my attitude. Anyway, you couldn't say that to my mother. She would beat you to death. So, you know, and I said, the stars. And she said, yes. But you can't see them too good, right? I said, yeah. And she said, do you know why? You know, so because of the moon. Now, your job in life, as long as you live, is to aim for the stars. You might miss and hit the moon, and the moon is not too bad. Never forgotten that.
Wow.
Aim for the stars. You might miss and hit the moon, and the moon isn't too bad. My point is this, that young people have to understand that you might have an aim that you want to achieve. And because you think you cannot achieve that, then you don't do anything. Try. You might not achieve that, but you might achieve. You understand? Chico didn't save the world, but he saved me. One last point in relation to young people, what I should tell them. A lot of times when I was at university, my teachers would look at me and say, you have this look on your face as if you want to change the world. You can't change the world, you know, and you're just hurting yourself like that. These are things that you can't change, you know, racism and fascism and all of that. You can't change those things. It took me a very long time, but I realized they were wrong. I can't change the world. What I can't change is the whole world. And that was their mistake. They believe in changing the world, you have to change the whole world. That's a mistake young people make. If you, for example, you personally realize, well, look, I should try and use my car less and use my bike more, you have already changed you. You are in the world. So you have already changed the world. Not the whole world, but you have already changed the world. If you talk to some young children and you say, look, you know, we have to think more carefully about the butterflies and so on. And you might have 2 or 3 little boys in the group who used to like killing butterflies. And all of a sudden they realize, no, I shouldn't do that because that actually helps to provide my food. You have changed the world, not the whole world, but you have changed the world.
Amazing. This was so, so inspiring. Thank you so much, not only for sharing your advice, but your mom's advice as well, which, I'm gonna have to write that down for my own daughter too. So this was so inspiring, and really, I think we need to all understand that even hearing the most fundamental things that we think we know, but hearing them in the right context and really connecting the dots and understanding how all things are tied, and in the end we're all part of this world, it's very eye-opening. And I really hope everyone who is listening is not taking notes but taking action, and starting with themselves and on the most day-to-day basic things even that is part of this world. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. Anything that you want to add or share, or any announcements that you think you want to share of any maybe possible future speaking engagements or anything like that?
Firstly, I want to say thank you very, very much for having me. I want to thank my executive secretary, and I want to thank him for having the faith and confidence that I should speak on his behalf. I want to thank you and your team for recording this. I'm very honored and very privileged to have had this opportunity. But I also want to say to all the peoples of the world that this is our planet. It belongs to all of us together, and we have to fix it together. And we would always have differences and different understandings. But at the end of the day, if we're driven by this one basic philosophy, I'm going out there and I mean well. And I mean well for us, you know. Now, in this world, listen to this very carefully. We have experiences. For example, as a black man living in a white world, they're very uncomfortable things for me. Now, those experiences, one of two things will happen to you. It would either make you better, Better, or bitter, Bitter. The difference between those two words is one letter. The I one is what makes you bitter because it's about me, about me, about me, about me. I, bitter. Bitter is E, everyone, which includes me as well.
Mm.
And the moment you get there and you realize it should make me better, it should include everybody. That's how we got to deal with this business. Till we get there, and we're in a serious, serious problem. I'm available to the world. Anybody could write to the Secretariat, invite me to talk to their school, to their students. I talk all over the world. I mean, all over the world. You know, I go and I do this because, as I said, this is not a job or a profession or an occupation. This is a conviction and a vocation. I know that we have to do this. And finally, I want to say we have, like all the other conventions, we have a website. People should visit that and find out what they can do if they want to do something. But we also have something called the Capacity Building Marketplace, the UNCCD Capacity Building Marketplace, part of which I do and run and manage and so on, because I'm the Innovations and Capacity Building Officer of the organization. Mm-hmm. So people should visit those pages, and there are all sorts of opportunities there, from volunteering to scholarships to internships to everything else, you know. And for university students who would like a great internship, they can always apply to our internship program, because not because we run it, it's one of the best internships program in the entire United Nations system. And the reason for this is because it is built on 4 basic things. When you come there, we give you some basic courses about the UN, about the UNCCD, about sustainable development, which you have to do in your first 2 weeks. This is not to test how bright you are, how dumb you are. No. It's because if you're working in an organization, you should know something about it. So when you leave there in 3 months, you should be able to say, this is the UN, this is what it does, and so on and so on. But also you get an appreciation of what this organization is about and why it does what it does. Yeah. Then the second part of it, that is that we train you to do what we want you to do. So you get actual skills and so on and so forth. Thirdly, we give you your own project, which you have to manage, design, and so on. When we say a project, we don't mean you write some paper for us or something. That's for university. You're not in university anymore. You're here to work. So we give you a project where you engage the world. So we ask you to run one of our essay competitions or one of our video competitions, or to organize a global panel discussion, all of that sort of stuff,
Amazing.
So it's an amazing internship program. And because your program, you said earlier that quite a lot of young people, university students, listen to it, then they should check the UNCCD, because we have one of the best internship programs in the world. I want to thank you and your team again. It was wonderful being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. That is this week's episode of What's Wrong with the Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. If you found value in this show, we would appreciate if you could head over to iTunes to rate and leave a review, or you can simply tell your friends about it. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Links can be found in the episode description. Thank you for listening.